All right, welcome to another episode of the In the Loop podcast. Today we're going to expound upon the idea around the application administrator. Blake, we did one of these a little while back. There was no video, no visuals. It was just our audio, and we talked about the persona of the administrator.
That's the one that we did on Teams.
We did it on Teams, and we recorded the
Didn't
cameras.
work out.
And we were split screen when we were watching it, but then when we looked at the recording, it was only one of us. And then we threw that out, and we just did it with a graphic, static graphic. But it was a good topic, and we specifically focused on one person.
At that time, it was the instrument, wasn't it?
I think it was just the app administrator, generically. We used the phrase, we talked about different 3D modeling, P&ID type stuff. So it was about the app administrator.
It was just about that. This line here.
Yeah. But that person is generally part of a team. That team generally has a manager. They also interface with IT. And, sometimes when you describe something in a podcast scenario or something like that, and you think like maybe we have the bigger picture, but maybe we didn't say that big picture all that well, right? And now we can sort of discuss some of the peripheral things around how that comes together to make to fill that role successfully and the support that is needed to make that work. And the reason I think this is coming up is we've been having some discussions about the concept of SaaS, software as a service. And if you're going to take a complex application like this and actually make it true software as a service, which is implying that basically you just are able to, access a tool without much configuration, without much backdoor management, what would the behind the scenes team need to look like in order to actually enable that?
To enable that for the users and the adoption of it, right?
Yeah, if you were theoretically starting your own engineering company and you wanted to have a smart tool, smart P&ID, currently the strategy is you go get licensing, you go get expertise, you build infrastructure, and you run the tool. But if we were to move to a scenario where you just sign up for a service and you have that app,
users just logged into that service to use.
Just if you only had engineers, right, and they were just going to log into that service and use it, what would actually be happening in the background in order to make that successful? So we drew out a picture of what that team looks like. That they're not all one team, but like what kind of generically the group looks like that supports that. And so we're going to dig into that. And so I think if you're going to, so first off, this is the level that we were describing. These are people from the discipline that have learned some technical skills and they administer engineering applications, correct?
Yeah. So you got your 3D, your P&ID, your instrument, and electrical in this example. And what you're saying is each one of these, and I think we said this last time, each one of these are like domain specific in their knowledge of actual engineering and design from a P&ID perspective or electrical or instrumentation or structural, right?
Yep. And if you consider this as like a major capital project, each of them is going to have responsibilities to facilitate a team of people that's using their tool to generate deliverables. And this could be multiple people here, by the way, right? You could have 2 or 3 3D admins, maybe, or depending on the size of the project,
or your user load.
Correct.
Which would really take on. So you could have like 3 admins here or 1 or 2 here, right? 1 or 2 here, so on.
Yes. Yeah, you could do that. Now, there's a role here I don't think we talked much about, and that's the manager of that group. I think that's an important role because this is a very technical team, very focused on the tool, very focused on the standards of the industry and the project. So it is good to have someone to facilitate that, organize, prioritize work, I guess. So that's a role there that I have seen be very important is to just guide that team, because this is typically the type of persona that really wants to be super laser focused on like running the tool perfectly and supporting the users. And so it is often good to have someone at a high level to help them just organize. Is that fair?
Yeah, and they kind of got to keep I don't want to say keep the peace, but they kind of got to keep these guys working together and understanding what's going on in each one of those disciplines, right?
Well, I think so. Sometimes too, you'll get a user request that sounds like a good idea locally to that administrator, but then the manager can help put that into perspective and say, "Ooh, no, that's not a decision that that we want to go, that we
Yeah,
want to make, that we
a
want to go down."
change here might affect data or some kind of workflow process in another application, is what you're saying, right?
Yeah. Now we have a couple of roles here beneath this that I think are kind of supplemental to helping this team do like create a good project environment.
So what would
And
your analyst do? Your data analyst?
would be a reporting specialist, would be the ability to like zoom out with the data, find issues. Like maybe an administrator is generally best at the tool, but secondarily interested in the data. So they might be able to bring up ideas and then have that analyst bring them to life. Or in particular, quality control reports, progressing reports, stuff like that. But really, it's like your Power BI type resource. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Um,
A quick, fast way to pull that information together from all of these applications and kind of get it out to your user base.
yes.
Is that it? Maybe
Yes.
do some cross comparisons real quick to make sure your data integrity is staying aligned.
Correct. Yes. And then this role here we have listed as programmer also could be called like your automation specialist, the person that's focusing on the more advanced functionalities within these packages. Maybe you've got some programming. We talked in the P&ID discussion about the various DLLs you can write, calculations you can write. And typically that programmer's not that first administrative role. They're more a specialist in that area. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And we were discussing this earlier in a discussion about good project support, and when the user, because imagine down here there's just a sea of users on the project, designers, engineers, and whatnot. Go ahead, you've got a question. I can see it.
Well, I was going to talk about your analyst here.
Okay.
So there is kind of a layer. I don't know if you would call it a layer, but there is some applications that fit above these, right? Like an information management type layer, right? And you got like applications like SDX or something else. Would the analyst kind of be the admin for that? Or would
I
that be like a admin all on its own?
I think that's another app. Like to me, you're mixing the idea of an org chart with a data diagram. When you put that there, that's a data flow question. I'm talking about organizationally how this kind of works out.
So you would have like SDX here then,
I would, I
and
think,
it
if
would
I'm
have
drawing
its
this
own admin.
correct.
And then the data analyst would just be supporting that admin.
I think so. I'm thinking of this person more like a pure database person, someone who can, you got a crazy idea, they can bring it to life. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
If we're following up on the concept of an administrator and then what surrounds that administrator.
Well, a lot of times what these guys could do, I guess, is they could do like maybe a quick and dirty test of a comparison or some kind of data that they want to see. And then if it looks good to everybody, maybe they put that in like an SDX type program or Power BI or some other program. But you got that information admin over here is what I'm gonna call it.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's fair.
Okay. And then your programmer is more app specific, like internal programming to each one of those.
They're like a special boost that you can give to these apps. And you could have one for each or whatever. It's just when you're thinking frontline support, if I'm on a major project and I'm going to be running using one of these tools, the person I most interface with is at this level. Is
Mm.
that fair? Like
Yeah.
that's the person that gave me my user login. That's the person that I call when I can't get access to what I need. When I want to do something and I can't figure it out, that's the person. If I get an error message, that's the person. And then this person becomes the face of the solution. They have to go out. Maybe they need a little help because what the user is seeing is really weird and they need some special reporting. Or maybe what the user is seeing is some some widget that was built by the programmer and it's not working right. So that admin will come to the programmer and say, "Hey, the thing you did isn't quite functioning." Or maybe this administrator has to go up to the DBA and say, "Hey, there's something funny with my database. Help me. Let's get that solved." Or there's something going on with the cloud because we haven't talked about these. But I think one of the important roles here is to understand that this is kind of the face of the help. Does that
Yeah,
seem fair?
that's the first stop in the chain.
Yeah, and everybody else is a little bit behind the scenes, right? The manager here is helping keep things on a good overall strategy, but not really getting in the way, not really answering the tickets or anything, just sort of doing it. These folks are helping with the technology behind the scenes, but it's all to help that role, which is the most identifiable role in this group, to be successful. Because they feel like the closest advocate or helper to the project.
To the actual project or user.
Right. And the reason that we wanted to bring up some of these things is I think what we typically see when you're internal to when one organization has this whole staff, then this person does most of the problem solving. And what they'll do is they'll interface with another support team member, but they'll be empowered to solve a lot of it. Now, what can happen is when you go to segregated environments, like let's say the IT host is somebody different than the support team, and obviously the vendor is separate. But when there's a separation here, sometimes it's a little harder, the communication, because you're changing, you have a bigger
Or if the
delta
flow
between
of the
those.
communication first goes to your IT, right? So if the flow, if these guys aren't the first stop, and the first stop is IT, then you also have a problem.
We generally see this being the first stop.
Yeah.
As
So if your
the
user's got a problem and he submits a ticket, is all ticketing systems do, right? You would want that going to the admin level of your support structure first. And then this guy would determine almost what type of problem that is.
Yeah, is it an IT problem
Yeah.
with a user account, with a cloud machine, with a user profile? Is it a software bug that I need to go to the software department vendor? Is it a special tool or is it standard base support need, right? Um, and yes, so what we typically see is that that's the starting point, and that's the best person empowered to analyze the problem and find the right way to contact this and solve it.
Yeah. And what you're talking about here is the support for the hosting of the engineering data workspace.
Yes. And
So what does it take to properly create that workspace in order to support it correctly for your SaaS environment? That's really what you're
if
getting
your
at, right?
ultimate so if this is just what it takes to make that work, and then you're saying what's the possibility to do that more from like a SaaS perspective where
Well, I guess we didn't need to define what SaaS is.
yeah.
because SaaS could be third party, but it could also be internal, even if a client is setting up a system. Like an owner operator is setting up a system and they're going to have their users log into that system. They're going to have external EPCs log into that system to do work. They have to have all of this just as well, right?
Yeah, when you say software as a service, I think even internally, that group is providing a service to their user base to bundle all of the mystery behind this into one interface point through these administrators. Is that Does that make sense?
So would you say one of the first things it has to have an IT environment that is
Yes.
friendly enough to handle all of these applications, friendly to handle external users coming into it outside of your organization, friendly enough to handle the data analyst understanding and getting the data he needs, and the programmer understanding and getting what he needs, and to manage the information across all of the applications. What else from an IT, like an infrastructure perspective, how could that mess up the support structure? Because that's really what you're talking about, right? Is the whole support structure around that workspace?
Yeah, when we talked handover, we talked about how, uh, you know, you eventually, whether it's early on in the project, you're going to build a cloud to work the project in, or whether it's after handover and you're going to build a cloud to maintain the facility for the life cycle. You had to have the right organizational plan to make that cloud successful. This is what happens behind the scenes in order to make that cloud work. And what you're saying, like from an IT perspective, one of the risks is that you don't allow enough access for these people to do their job. So you can potentially create a network where the administrators who normally would be able to troubleshoot a problem and solve it, maybe they have bigger barricades around, or barriers around what they can access. So if an
Yeah,
IT's
you put a limit on these guys here on what their actual capabilities are. So then they don't know where to direct the problem to, right? Or they can't even solve the problem.
Generally, this is a level that has enough exposure, some of it even read only, but enough tools and exposure to be able to pretty much figure out any problem and then tell the right person what the problem is. They may not be able to fix them all, but they can identify them all. However, when this moves into like a hosted SaaS concept, one of the risks is that they don't have that same access.
Yeah, and I think what you're saying there is because ideally in a good supported environment, the users, like we said earlier, are coming to these guys as the first line of defense. So this becomes that first line of defense.
Right. And I was describing to someone earlier today, when, like, if you've ever been out in a facility and you've been in the control room, if you're in charge of the control system, you know that if something goes wrong, then everyone's going to look to you to get that control system functional again.
Functional and working.
And because the product out there is all governed by how well that control system is running. Well, when you're on a project, the product is the work that all of these users are doing. And this is the control system that enables all that work. And so when something goes down, when you have an outage, it is an outage, right? You've got a company that's generating man hours to generate deliverables to execute a project. When they have one of these applications not functioning, this team scatters. They become the technicians, the troubleshooters. They're the ones working late at night, working on the weekends. They're trying to patch something or resolve something. And so enabling that type of culture where that team is free to really find what the issue is and find the fastest solution is an important thing.
Yeah, because your user base would come in, and they would hit this team first, and then if it's like a P&ID issue, right? P&ID issue, user submits a ticket or submits a problem and says, hey, I have an issue with Smart Plan P&ID. This guy is going to look at that and say, well, that issue is actually an IT issue, so I need to go get some IT support.
But honestly, at that point, that person generally, if they have enough access, they already know what the solution is. It may not be their job to necessarily switch it or fix it, but they actually have enough visibility to already, when they make this contact, they're able to say, hey, I'm pretty sure this is my problem and I need your help to get it fixed.
He's not just going out and reaching to this guy for help. He's also guiding this guy on how to solve the problem.
Yes.
In a way.
In an ideal world.
In an ideal world, he already kind of knows. And so he's telling this guy, hey, this is the specific issue. This is what we need to fix.
Right. And kind of the secret sauce in this role is having enough of that access and enough of that knowledge to be able to already know what that most likely solution is. Even if you're going to the vendor, oftentimes you do know what the right answer is. You just need a little boost in order to get it completed. Where this can be a challenge in a cloud is where maybe the IT and the engineering relationship is more strict,
is more segregated.
and so there's a less visibility here, so that user doesn't actually have enough access to get all the way to what the likely solution is. They have to hand it over more, less informatively, and just say, hey, I have a problem. I can't see exactly what it is. Can you fix it? The problem is then the team that's most familiar doing their troubleshooting is handing it to someone who's less familiar with the real problem, and they tend to take longer to solve it, or come back and say, hey, I don't really think it's my problem, and then it comes back here. And maybe you bounce over here and ask the question, and you come back here.
Well, and I think too that's driven by what is coming from your user base, right? Because your user base, they don't actually understand the integral workings of all of the back end. So you'll get a problem like, hey, I can't generate my one line. That's what the user will say, right? Well, I mean, that could be strictly inside of the application. Maybe if it's a preference setting or something of that nature. That could be an IT in the cloud issue. Maybe he doesn't have the right access that he needs from a cloud perspective. Maybe there's a problem inside of the database that's like causing that issue. Or it could be a vendor problem. Maybe there is a bug in the software. Right? But the user is just going to say, I can't generate my red line, or I can't generate my one line.
Right.
They're not going to know all of that other stuff. And what this guy is doing is, he's basically interpreting what the user says and says, okay, well, this guy can't generate a one line. Let me check on that. His preferences are set, so it's not his preferences. There's not a bug in the software. But wait a minute, he doesn't have access to a file location or something on the network. So let me work with IT over here and say, hey, this user needs access to this location on the network or this attribute on the network.
Right. So in its most efficient form, this role is the communicator to understand the problem, connect to the right person, usually with a suggested fix, and then to communicate back to the user and say, hey, everything's good, check it out, are you good? In its lesser efficient forms, when there are bigger barriers between these groups, this person is less effective.
Yeah, because what happens then is this user, say, either goes to this guy, if he's even there, right? So if this guy exists, he goes to him. But what you're saying is that some instances he can be hand tied. Like he can't actually do it.
Would have limited visibility, in the wrong IT setup could have limited visibility to the database, the tools. Some of those are taken away. Maybe not as much access to understand the IT configuration. And again, it's not always about being able to change anything. Sometimes it's just about being able to see enough of the problem
Yeah.
or to understand the network layout or the traffic or something like that when you're trying to solve a performance issue or something like that. So when you look at, hey, could this whole thing be more of a hosted or a SaaS type solution? You start getting into the questions, okay, how do I still empower these various groups to help each other efficiently?
Well, and I'm going to say this is really the key to making, from a support perspective, this is really the key to making those SaaS solutions or a hosted solution work properly, in my opinion. Because what could happen is if they weren't the first line of defense, maybe IT is the first line, and the user is just going straight to IT with that problem. And then what IT is going to do is they're going to come back and say, well, it's not an IT problem, so we can't do anything about it.
Yeah, this is rarely the most efficient path because
Straight to IT.
there's more volume here with a whole bunch of other stuff for the company, right? But if you have this level in place, then they're very specifically geared to solve these problems.
When you mean more volume, you mean IT is handling multiple applications outside of this workspace.
There's a whole nother
Right.
world
There's
off
like
the
a
side
whole
of this
nother
board
world.
that they're dealing with everything, correct?
Yeah.
But this group here is very specifically centered around these project tools.
Yeah. Centered around what is just internal in this project world, if you will. IT, they got all kinds of stuff. I mean, they got even accounting stuff, right? Procurement stuff. They got all kinds of stuff going on.
Yeah.
Asset management, who knows? And then they get a question about generating a one-line drawing, and they're like, well, okay, it appears you have all the access you need. When in reality, it could have been a preference setting. And they still can't generate the one line, but IT's going to come back and say, you're good. You got all the access. I can't do anything.
Yeah, and
Right.
you've got kind of like 4 levels to me here. This is the first level. And then this is the second level where you're doing some of the more advanced features. So by the nature of them being advanced features, they're a little bit of a bonus. So when they don't work, you got a little bit of understanding like, okay, we got a little time to work that out. Like when this isn't working, when the base tool's not working, then that sends up a lot of immediate red flags, right? Because nobody's working at that point. When you have automation features that aren't working, it's an inconvenience. You need to get them fixed, but it might be a little bit different. Then you got IT becomes the third level. It's like, okay, if it's not one of these two, because these two work in concert real closely, and they're close to the technical side, then you're going to bounce up to IT and say, hey, did we have some type of setting change? Did we apply a patch over the weekend? Did we do something weird? You know what I mean?
Would you say that these guys here are basically on this team?
They're on the team. I agree.
They're like a part of the team.
Yes.
Maybe not application specific, but they're kind of a part of the team.
Yes.
Yeah.
And they fall generally under the same management.
Under the same management.
Right? Yes.
Yeah.
And then this is typically separate, but they need to be friends. And right, these guys need to feel supported by IT.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then ultimately, fourth, you end up having to go back to the vendor if you think there's really something that's
If
just
there's
not.
really some kind
We've
of
done
bug or
everything we
something like
need
that.
to do to configure it, and it's just not working.
But 90% of the time, the user's problem can either be solved by this administrative, I don't know, management team with some IT support, I would say.
I think it's even higher than 90.
Higher than 90. Most of the time, there's not actually a bug in the system to what the user's problems are, right? Like if they can't generate a one line, or they can't, I don't know, create a new symbol in PNID or something of that nature, right? That's not a bug in the system.
Well, and we label this as a bug, but sometimes it is just a sanity. It is just we did something wrong. Can you offer offer a little help. Where did we go awry? Is there a support item we could go look at or research that would explain to us maybe, where we could get a little bit of help? But in general, like you're asking, you want to set up these systems in a way to where the data is secure behind the scenes and it's conducive to these advanced features that you want to do. So that's the most critical starting point there. And then second, in order to make this, to bring this to life, I think we're going to talk a little bit about the right culture that you need in order to do that. Is that right?
Yeah, but I kind of want to get. I would say that this team, and maybe this is part of the culture thing too. So this is just if your users have a problem, but also this team right here is key in helping drive adoption of these utilities or these applications within your organization as well.
I think that's a key difference between what you look to this role to do versus what you look to this role to do. A lot of times this role here is only when there's a problem. But here you are intending this group to be
More
proactively
proactive.
helping this user base.
So some of it is going back down to the users, really, right? To say, hey, we're here to help you be successful.
Yes.
So if they have a problem, they have somebody to call, and it's their first line of defense, right? But at the same time, this team is actually also, I wouldn't say reaching out, but also letting the user base know that they're there to help them be successful.
Yes.
Whether that's through projects or just operations, right? And like day-to-day operations, they're gonna be there as an extension of your user base almost.
Yeah. Okay, you were writing the number 2. Okay, the admin support
Yeah,
team.
because I think when we're talking about a SaaS solution, I think that the two things that are most important is one, that you have that IT environment that facilitates this entire workspace. I'm going to call it an ecosystem because I know it makes you mad. Ecosystem for your engineering information, for your engineering data. And I think that goes with your access. It has to facilitate the whole thing from conceptual design all the way to operations, which there's a lot of moving parts and pieces in there. And if this team, like you were saying earlier, if they're prohibited from an IT perspective, from a network perspective, from actually doing their support needs, that's a problem.
Mm-hmm.
That's a major problem. Additionally, if this infrastructure is set up not in a way, because what can happen with IT sometimes is they'll set it up in a way where they prohibit not only this team, but they'll prohibit the user base from accessing data. So they don't segregate it correctly, or they don't allow the users to access the applications that they need the most. And so that can cause problems itself.
Mm-hmm.
Just from that perspective. And then the second one, which I think is key, is your admin app support team, is this team. I think it takes both of these together to make that solution viable. You can't do it without both of these. I don't think so.
Well, I think when people typically start talking about something SaaS, they often talk about applications that are fairly self-explanatory. Like when James was here, he talked about the fact that smartphones, they have a lot of stuff on them, a lot of apps, but you don't get trained. You don't really need support. They're all built for you to just figure it out. And so they're all kind of SaaS because you just load the app, it updates automatically, no maintenance, you figure it out, there's no support. You didn't have to do anything other than hit the update button. Do you know what I mean? And so a lot of the SaaS discussions are often around apps that don't have this layer of complexity. So they have the IT piece, right? The app gets developed, programmed, and deployed. The vendor, provides it. But then when you start talking about one of these complex apps that has this whole team also embedded in the process, you try to make this a SaaS tool. Well, have you included this team in your equation? Because a lot of times you'll include the servers, the licenses, the database, and the apps technically available, but are all of those people empowered to actually help you like they always are in other scenarios?
Well, I think you're right on that, saying that a lot of times that's what people think, and so they do just default to the IT side for the SaaS model. Um, I think the difference in these applications is that they're authoring data. People are actually doing work in these applications. It's like an enterprise level data set, right? It's not like an app on your phone where the information going into the app on the phone is you're just providing it, like your information, like your daily routine, your tasks, whatever you're trying to do. But no, there's actual engineering and design work happening here. So they're more complex. I also think that it's moving in the whole like operational digital twin. I think the information or the main source of information is moving, which makes this and these apps even more um, higher priority, more critical. Because I think originally, like the asset in an operational digital twin, the asset management was seen as like the master data set. But now what I think is happening is the shift in the industry is owner operators are realizing that the actual all of their data for the entire facility, whether it's asset data, whether it's bill of material, purchasing data, whether it's operations and maintenance information, all that data originates from the authoring tools during the conceptual engineering and design of a facility.
Mm-hmm.
And so if they have a enterprise level system like what we're talking about, then they can just use that data and propagate it to those other systems within their organization, and they don't have to recreate it in any way.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And so I think that shift is leaning more. I mean, we got some owners now that we are working with that's saying like, hey, instrumentation. So like they're using like a smart plant instrumentation or a main instrumentation system. They're saying all of my master instrumentation information asset resides in smart plant instrumentation. It doesn't reside in SAP. It doesn't reside in those other systems. Actually lives in the engineering app now. And then those other systems just get the data.
But it only lives well in that app if you have these parties represented in order to support it. Otherwise, it can get sort of bogged down in those applications.
Well, yeah, I agree. And I think that's why that you have to have both of them together. And then I think you mentioned the culture. I think the culture goes between all of these, so your app and your IT mainly, to understand that their objective is to support the user base, right?
But the best connection point for that culture is through this line right here. This becomes the face of each of those apps.
Because they're the closest to what this user base is used to. Because generally, like you were saying earlier, these guys actually are domain specific. So your instrument admin probably at one point in time was an instrument engineer or instrument designer from that discipline, right?
Yeah.
And then they became an admin, so they understand the what's going on down here.
Yeah, and all of these roles are necessary, but that's the role that becomes the primary communication point to the users, and they're the ones that are the greatest advocate for the software and making it work. The other thing I wanted to mention when you talk SaaS is this is also the role that typically does the upgrades, the hot fixes, all that sort of stuff, service packs. And so sometimes if you consider moving this whole thing to a SaaS environment, it may be tempting to say, well, all those upgrades and hot fixes and everything are controlled by the IT group that's running this cloud. But really, this team knows how to communicate to the users and say, hey, we're going to have an outage. We're going to go through a change. Here's the little bit of training you need. Here's the reason we're doing this upgrade, hot fix, patch, whatever. And so that's another thing is if you're transitioning from a more like, traditional organization and moving tools like this into a SaaS type operation, you need to know that this role is still going to be the one that communicates on those upgrades and service packs.
Well, I agree with that. I'd also say they know what's going on with the users. So if there's a big turnaround coming up or there's a capital project going on, they know what's happening there, and they're also helping manage the information for those. Because you don't want to just go and upgrade the whole system and have a big turnaround coming up the next day.
Correct.
That would be a disaster. Because what happens when the upgrade doesn't? There's a problem with the upgrade, or they can't get the deliverables they want because the upgrade's taking too long, or something of that nature, right? So this team would be closely tied in to the actual execution from the user base and understand what's happening there as well.
Mm-hmm. Agreed.
Yeah.
Okay. To me, that covers it pretty well. It just rounds out around that role that we kind of defined. How does everyone play together to make that person successful? And they kind of get most of the credit, to be honest with you, for like keeping an app running. And these other participants play a role in that. But we want that person to be able to have enough capabilities to know what the answers are, and then to just pull the right lever. I need help from you for this. I need a reporting help. I need automation help. I need IT help. But really, you want that level to be the critical point, the fulcrum of all of this.
Yeah, I agree. I think for a complete hosted solution, the key items are you have to have an IT environment that's friendly, and they have to understand that it's going to take it from concept all the way to operations. And then you have to have an administrative team that understands what their role is and has the ability within the IT environment to actually support the user base.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And then I think you have to have the culture between both of those groups to kind of put it all together.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I think that's the only way you can make a successful, like, actual hosted solution or a SaaS model, if you will. If you only have one of these, I don't think it'll work.
Yeah.
In my opinion, you'll have a lot of difficulties, and you won't. If you only have the IT environment, then it's probably not going to be friendly. Your users are going to be accessing or requesting information from IT that IT doesn't know or understand. They're not going to have the understanding of what the users are actually working on and doing. If you have an admin group, but you don't have a friendly IT, then the admin group's going to be held back from actually supporting the user base, right?
Yeah, and the interesting part to me is that for any of us that have worked in an EPC, we actually know all the parts and pieces that it takes to make this successful and kind of how they're supposed to play together. The question is when you pick it outside of that company and you put it in a third party, or there's a third party involved.
Does that third party know?
When you build bigger barriers, does the third party realize that you're kind of breaking what made that work?
That's the question.
Yeah.
Yeah, when you take it to a third party, does the third party understand these things? And do they know what that means?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I would agree.
And the whole time, what you're balancing there is the cybersecurity concept here. So you say friendly, we want it to be friendly and
Secure.
workable, but at the same time secure. And what happens is the secure part of it ends up being the part that puts some of the guardrails up or the barriers up
that make it not friendly.
That break it. Yeah. And so you find yourself with a secure, unfriendly scenario.
I think there's ways around that, though, to be honest with you. I think there's ways around it to where you can open it up, make it friendly environment, make it to where users or projects can get the data they need, make it to where the admin team can actually support it properly and keep it just as secure.
Yeah, I think so too.
So
okay. Well, good. Well, thank you guys for joining us in that discussion and following up on the admin role.